If you saw the thumbnail and thought, is this guy basing me? The answer is no. At least in spirit it's no, because this build does all the important parts of these exotics. It's a Liar's Handshake and Wormgod Caress build, but functionally works like it's got Assassin's Scowl because of our aspects, fragments, and weapons. Healing and invisibility on melee kills from Assassin's Scowl, and the damage bonuses from Liar's Handshake and Wormgods. But that's just the core of the build. We've got status Slow, Freeze, Radiant, Unravel, Void Overshields, Weaken, Woven Mail, Devour, Amplified, Invisibility, Volatile, a massive damage escalating melee that can refund our dodge, which can refund our melee, as well as having access to Transcendent for giving us another weapon damage boost on top of Radiant, damage resist, a grenade that slows and scorches, as well as ability refreshes on Transcendent activation. To put it in the words of the devs themselves, it sounds...
It feels a little game breaking, I'm not gonna lie.
A little bit?
But before actually getting into the build, I have to start it off with this. If you're fully happy understanding that everything I'm saying here is pure speculation, then there'll be a timestamp on screen, skip to that. But I have to say this so I'm not just insta-cancelled. This is a Theorycraft build. Where I can, I've tried to get info from the dev inside Prismatic Deep Dive, as well as a developer gameplay reveal, and just using game knowledge of what we know about these abilities already. But there will be a lot, and I mean a lot, of what ifs, maybes, and assumptions. That comes from three things that we don't know. Firstly, we don't have a full set of fragments yet, so I can't be sure what I'm showing you are the best possible options. Keep an eye out for a pinned comment. If Bungie does release any more before launch that I'd recommend, you'll see them down there. Secondly, we've never had access to combining these abilities together, so how they might stack will be somewhat guesswork. Again, I've tried to rely on game knowledge here of what we already know, but I can't guarantee that what I'm saying is 100% correct. But the third one, and by far the biggest factor here of whether this build can or cannot work, is whether Wormgods are coming to the class item in the final shape with their full damage attached, and whether we are able to double stack damage boosting exotics on the class item. Liar's Handshake is more likely to be coming to the game in final shape, as we've already seen it in playtest footage. I did a video on it, check that out if you're interested in an exotic class item breakdown, but the short version from that video is that Liar's Handshake was doing full damage in the playtest. But we never saw Wormgods, and we never saw a combination of exotics that both increased damage. For example, we saw Syntheseps and Liar's Handshake in the reveal, but never being used on the same class item. Again, this whole video is fundamentally speculative. I don't know if what I'm saying is right, and any of it could change, because using Bungie's words here, in development, subject to change. If you skipped here from the beginning, it was a small lie. I'ma still hit you with the TLDR disclaimer. Just be aware that anything and everything could change, and what I'm saying about these exotics working together is guesswork. That being said, if I've hit the nail on the head, and we can run this build as I describe, I genuinely believe this is going to be a Mesa upsetter. I think this could be dealing more damage than Strand Navigator Titan, but with way more safety and flexibility, as well as being usable in equipment lock content, as this build won't need you to loadout swap to tractor cannon in order to get its max damage off. I've got two versions of this build at the moment. I'll go through what I think will be the best all-round, neutral game, take anywhere version, and the boss DPS focus version, which follows closely what Strand Navigator Titan is doing at the moment. But if you actually listen to all that, I've probably put you through a couple of minutes worth of disclaimers, and you came here for a build. Let's fix that. The two aspects you'll be wanting to use here are Stylish Executioner and Winter's Shroud. Importantly, with Stylish Executioner on Prismatic exclusively, it has been modified from on killing a suppressed, volatile, or weakened target will grant invisibility and true sight, to now killing an enemy affected by a subclass debuff will grant invisibility and true sight, which is one of two reasons why we're running Winter's Shroud, which on dodging slows anything around us. We can dodge to slow, then punch or shoot anything that's slowed to go invis. And the nice thing about Winter Shroud as well is at the beginning of this season, they changed it so it's applying 60 slow, meaning that in 2 dodges, we can fully freeze a target. This is also where we can take one of the more redundant parts of Stylish Executioner and turn it into a massively powerful ability in our kit, because Stylish Executioner also has the added effect of melee attacks while invisible from Stylish Executioner have 150% increased damage, weaken enemies, and have increased lunge range. It doesn't actually mention this in-game, but it is a feature of this aspect, just one that's very underutilized, because we've only had this effect going off on Void, where the Smoke Bomb is a low damage utility ability, and base Void melee has no built-in damage boost, making the effect not that useful. But now, with Prismatic, we're going to be able to pair this extra melee damage, weaken and lunge, with Combination Blow, which is 100% the melee that brings this build together. Combination Blow is not only going to be giving us massive melee damage scaling, up to 309% increased damage at max stacks, but also is going to be resetting our dodge cooldown and starting health regen on a powered melee kill. And with Gambler's Dodge, which is what you'll be taking with this build, we're going to be able to reset our melee cooldown on dodging near an enemy. Just between 2 aspects, a melee and class ability, we're already getting a 309% increased damage melee from 3 times Combination Blow, 150% increased damage melee from exiting invisibility from Stylish, a 15% debuff from our melee when exiting invisibility from Stylish, an on-demand freeze from Winter Shroud, crowd control and ad clear from shatter damage. We'll start health regen from getting a kill with Combination Blow. We'll get our dodge refunded from getting a kill with Combination Blow. And we'll go invis from killing a weakened, slowed or frozen enemy, reprocking our weakened debuff, and 150% increased melee damage from Stylish Executioner. 4 abilities, and all of them, and they called it a little broken. And the great thing about these is that they're all confirmed from the Prismatic deep dive, meaning that even if what I'm saying about exotic combos later off is way off the mark, I'm confident that I'm not wrong about these abilities, and I'm guessing, important word being guessing, that like any other damage increasing exotics, subclass debuffs are added before exotic damage scaling, meaning Combination Blow's 309% increase will be added alongside the Stylish 150% increase, and then scaled up from there by Wormgod's and Liar's Handshake. You've already heard me mention it a few times throughout, but Wormgod Caress and Liar's Handshake are the exotics for this build. Both of these function as ways to massively boost our melee damage. With Wormgods, we'll be receiving a melee damage bonus that scales up to 275% extra melee damage. It also does give glaive damage and weapon damage, but whether we'll be seeing that come to the final shape with those added benefits, we don't know. Then with Liars, when receiving or dealing melee damage, you'll get the cross counter buff, which will give your next melee 200% increased damage. And again, we should be seeing subclass damage boost before exotic damage boosts, like how at the moment, Combination Blow's damage is added and then scaled up by Liars. Our grenades can even lean into supporting our melee as well, either through using Magnetic Grenade, which we can modify with Fragments into a debuffing tool for DPS in the all-round build, Dustfield Grenades to build more into crowd control, or you could also take the Grapple Melee for the all-round build here, as it should count as a powered melee hit, meaning it'll refund your class ability, as well as unravel anything hit by the Grapple Melee, which is a debuff, meaning you'll get invisibility off of Stylish Executioner and a Tangle. And the great thing about this setup is that it relies on both light and dark abilities, which means we shouldn't have one transcendent bar lagging behind the other. We'll have light abilities in our melee and grenade, if you choose magnetic, and dark abilities in Winter Shroud, Dustfield, or Grapple if you pick those grenades. And if you know how Strand Wormgod Navigator Titan works, you'll already know that the grenade you'll be taking for the boss DPS version is the Grapple Grenade. Actually, if the part you're only interested in is the boss DPS version, I'll put a timestamp on screen now, and it'll also be down in the description that'll go over the changes to the build if that's what you're here for. As for the super that this build will be using, you'll want to take Tether. I probably don't have to explain this to you, just that the important takeaway is it's applying a 30% weaken and suppress, which can proc Stylish Executioner. With Prismatic though, we can't talk about our super without our first fragment, the Facet of Purpose, which on picking up an Orb of Power grants either Amplified, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield based on the damage type of your equipped super. I think because we've already got healing, you'll get more value from this fragment by going for damage resist or void overshield. There's a trade-off here though in whether you want to take a worse super in Silk Strike or Silence in School, but potentially better survivability tools in Woven Mail or the new Frost Armor, which is looking to be a damage resist based off of what was seen in the developer gameplay preview. Again, I want to say that this isn't the full fragment set. Keep an eye out for a pinned comment if Bungie reveals anything further that I'd recommend over the fragments I mentioned here. Facet of Protection, which grants damage resist while surrounded, is an obvious choice for the build, and I'm assuming this will be a 25% damage resist, similar to what we see in our Arc subclasses from Spark of Resistance. Not only does what I assume the fragment is look extremely similar to Spark of Resistance, there is also a point in the dev gameplay where a Prismatic class is using Spark of Resistance, which I'm assuming means that they've used the same stats from that fragment, given it a name change and a fresh coat of paint, and just put it in Prismatic. Next, you'll want to be taking 2 of the melee based fragments from Prismatic, in Facets of Dawn, which on powered melee hits against targets makes you radiant, and powered melee final blows make both you and nearby allies radiant, as well as Facets of Bravery, which on killing targets with grenades gives volatile rounds to your void weapons, and on killing targets with powered melee final blows grants unraveling rounds to your strand weapons. And lastly, you'll want to take the Facet of Ruin, which increases the size and damage of shattering an enemy or crystal, and increases the size of our ignitions. We're only really using this with Freeze from Winter Shroud, and not the ignition part. Although Facet of Ruin is definitely the fragment I would be most comfortable swapping out, with Facet of Dominance being a good replacement, which causes your Void Grenades to weaken, and your Arc Grenades to jolt, or what are the other fragments that get released that seem like obvious choices here. As for weapons, you'll be wanting to use a Strand 1-2 Punch shotgun, with the only one currently being Swordbreaker. 1-2 Punch will just be to beef up our melee a bit more, but the gun being Strand is important too, as it'll be able to apply Unravel, which we'll have from Facet of Bravery. It's also important to note that against bosses, our Uncharged Melee, Combination Blow and Grapple Melee will all benefit from an extra 50% damage against bosses instead of the standard 100% damage increase. And depending on what fragments are released will change whether the next gun is necessary or not, but Buried Bloodline might be a great choice for this build, mainly because this will be how we'll mirror the healing that's given off both Liar's Handshake and Assassin's Cowl through getting Devour from its exotic perk. From its Catalyst as well, which can weaken, we'll have another reliable way to proc Stylish Executioner. This will also make activating Facet of Bravery easier, as Devour will be feeding into refunding our grenades, which will mean we'll have more uptime and volatile rounds on Buried Bloodline. That being said, if there is a fragment that's released that can give Devour without much effort, the need for Buried Bloodline isn't as great, and means that we can switch this out for either another exotic energy or an exotic heavy. And as for your heavy, this can be a flex pick. Anything that's Strand or Void can apply Volatile or Unravel from Facet of Bravery for more damage. If you're joining back up here because you're wanting to see the boss DPS version, let's get into it, because this is the part of the build that I'm really excited about. I want to start off by saying that Hunter is the only class on launch that has the Grapple Grenade on Prismatic, with Warlock having Threadling Grenade and Titan having Suspending Grenade. It'll mean even if all other classes get Liars and Worm Gods, none of them are going to be able to abuse Navigator Grapple on Prismatic apart from Hunters. If you have joined up here as well, I'm not going to re-explain abilities I've mentioned already, but I will put up all the ability names so you're not completely out of the loop. One thing I do have to get out of the way though, is that I have 3 assumptions here. Firstly, I'm assuming the grapple melee is benefiting from 3x combination blows damage increase. Secondly, I'm assuming that the grapple melee will activate cross counter as it's coded as a melee. And thirdly, I'm assuming that the grapple melee will benefit from Liar's Handshake 200% damage increase. If all of those assumptions turn out to be right, your combo will look like what Strand Navigator Titan is doing at the moment, with one key difference. You'll set up a grapple tangle with Navigator, you'll shoot Shadow Shot, which would normally be a tractor cannon shot, and then you'll 1-2 punch grapple melee until the boss is dead. As for the build itself, you'll want to make the following changes. Switch your kinetic for Navigator to make grapple points. You'll want to switch your 1-2 punch shotgun into your energy, and heavy can stay the same as your previous build, as you won't really be using this during DPS phases. You want to change your grenade to grapple, and your super should be Shadow Shot to apply the 30% weaken debuff that Tractor would normally be doing. If you don't have super, but still want to weaken, you'll have to punch the boss from being invis from stylish, and then do the combo as normal. One of the great things about this version of the build is that you can take it into equipment lock content, as you'll have weaken, grapple points, and a 1-2 shotgun all within one setup. And this boss DPS version will still be perfectly fine to take into any piece of content in the game. You won't have Devour from Buried Bloodline, but what you will get from Navigator is constant uptime on Woven Mail, assuming you're playing with at least one other person, and the gun also applies Sever, which is a debuff, which means a tangle spawn as well as going invis on killing a severed target from Stylish Executioner. And you'll also have a much better gun for spreading Unravel from Facet of Bravery, as it's a trace, so its RPM is way higher and can proc it more. Just because I'm calling this version the DPS version, please don't think of it as its only use being DPS. You can probably take this altered version of the build and do just as well as the one I mentioned before. And I do just want to circle round to what I said at the beginning. If we aren't able to double stack damage boosting exotics, it's not like this build is just going to fall apart. It'll still do everything I've brought up so far, just with a bit less damage. Worm Gods will be the obvious exotic over Liars, and then just pair it up with another exotic. I can't really say what that other one will be, because we're so in the dark about what will and will not be coming to the game in final shape on the exotic class item. And as for gameplay, I obviously can't show anything, but it'll play like a blend between Assassin's Cowl and Liar's Arc Hunter. Your gameplay loop will be apply a debuff to get invis from Stylish, which most of the time will be from your dodge, then keep up your combination blow and Worm God stacks to make your melee do way more damage. And it genuinely isn't more complicated than that. Get Worm God stacks, get combination blow stacks, close the gap with invis, and use your dodge as a crowd control tool. If you're using the all-round general play build, you also want to start your loop with getting Devour, and then go from there. If you're using Navigator, apply Woven Mail to yourself and teammates, but don't forget about Unraveling rounds from Bravery, which Nav can abuse way more. And for the boss DPS version, just to put this in some context of what the highest possible damage numbers are you might be getting from this build in one melee, assuming the stars align and everything is set up correctly. Worm Gods is at max stacks, combination blow is at max stacks, cross counter is ready, 30% weaken is up, a 1-2 punch is active and being used on a boss, you should be hitting 76 times your base original damage. Using this clip as an example, we hit 15,335 damage off of a grapple. Add combination blow damage, and this hits for 62,720. If we scale up this number by damage bonuses added by Worm Gods and Liars, which is a total 475% damage increase, we hit for 360,640. Add on to this the scaling we get from 1-2 punch against hitting a boss, and our melee scales up to 901,602 damage. Apply the 30% weaken debuff, and this number spikes to 1,172,082 damage from one grapple melee. Although I do have to say, this number is making one big assumption, and that is that Liar's Handshake is dealing its full damage. It's got a unique interaction with 1-2 punch, but not in a good way. Cross counter will only deal 80% increased damage instead of its 200% increased damage when using it in combination with 1-2 punch. Whether this unique interaction is carried over onto the exotic class items is something we don't know, but if it is, we still hit a massive damage number. Around 927,000 damage, just not one quite as big, and it breaks my heart that this doesn't hit 1 mil. But it's still dealing damage close to a Celestial Nighthawk shot, so I guess I can't be too picky. And with that being said, that's the Theorycraft build. This is genuinely the build I am most looking forward to get my hands on if it's possible to get this exotic combo on the class item. I've got a Theorycraft Titan and Warlock build in the works as well, so maybe expect those in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I do also just want to say that I am fully expecting a comment like, "You should use Syntheseps," but I prefer the consistent damage that Liars can guarantee over Synthos needing you to be surrounded, even though it's a better damage bonus. But with that out of the way, I really hope you enjoyed this build, and I'm aiming for these videos to give a glimpse at what we might be able to do with Prismatic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the build, whether you thought I did my damage calcs right, whether you think I over or under-explained anything. Again, any and all feedback is welcome. And YouTuber call to actions like sub, bloody blah, you get the gist. But that's it from me.